I think you might have the dreaded GM truck engine lifter tick. Well, don't worry and calm down. It may not be exactly what you think. In this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know about how to diagnose your truck and the sounds it's making. You don't have to go searching all over for different videos. I've done all that hard work for you and I've put it all here. All the sounds, all the tips and tricks, and how to diagnose this thing fully so that you'll be able to know by the end of this video whether you've got a minor problem on your hands, major teardown ahead. First off, let's make sure that you're dealing with a GM engine tick and not a knock, okay? A knock is a more serious problem and it sounds something like this. You hear that? You hear that? Pop, 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 pop. You hear that? That? Okay. That's an engine knock. Assuming you do not have that engine knock and it's more of a ticking sound, that's what we're going to diagnose now. First off, not all ticks in the engine bay of a GM truck are lifter tick. The only ticks that you need to really be concerned about are going to be those that are loud and consistent, like the ones that I'm going to show in these videos that are coming up. So watch these videos over and over again and train your ear to hear the differences between these different ticks and what it might mean for your vehicle. There are a number of ticking sounds under the hood that are normal. Most of them are quiet, things like injectors opening or relays turning off and on or solenoids activating. I'll share a few video clips now of some of those quieter ticking sounds that are common under the hood that can kind of make us think that there's a bigger problem than there is.
Really hard to unplug. There we go. It's nailing.
To pinpoint the source of your noise, what you want to use is a mechanic stethoscope like this one here. It's got a hose on it that you can point at different places around the engine and it'll accentuate the noise and exactly where it's coming from. If you don't have one of these, I'll put a link to one in the description, but if you don't have one of those, chances are you've got some rubber hose laying around somewhere, old piece of water line, and this will work the same. You can put it up to your ear and then point this in down into the engine and find where that noise is emanating from. Some of the other common symptoms that accompany these valve train issues are rough running, a misfire, maybe a skip at idle you feel. Check engine light comes on, especially if you see it flashing and it has an accompanied stabilitrack and traction control error, like this video here. When you pull the codes for the vehicle, a lot of times you'll see that misfire code, P0300. Or if it's truly associated with the displacement on demand air fuel management system or DOD AFM system, it'll be on cylinders 1, 4, 6, or 7. So you might see P301, P304, P306, or P307. Another code that's really common whenever you see these valve train issues is P0324. That's a knock sensor performance code. Now this isn't a typical knock sensor code saying there's a problem with the knock sensor. No, this is a code that's saying the knock sensor here's a problem in the engine. Another symptom that's associated with valve train issues is also often the cause, and that is low oil pressure. And by low, I mean less than about 30 psi. There's a lot of different causes for low oil pressure in these engines. One of the main ones is the filter screen that sits underneath the oil pressure sender. So the sender itself could be bad, or that little filter screen underneath it could be clogged with trash or dirt, and that's usually due to poor maintenance. The main cause of lifter failure is low oil pressure. And this is caused often in the early year model trucks, especially from loose bolts on that VLOM, which is that engine cover right in between the valley underneath the intake that distributes oil to each one of those little solenoids to actuate your lifters. If that bolts on that thing are loose, then oil pressure can seep by the seals and not go where it's supposed to go and actuate those lifters the correct way. Check out this video from my friend over at Craze Performance Repair that shows how loose some of those VLOM bolts can get.
And we're gonna go ahead and grab some of these bolts just with my fingers, and we're gonna see what happens here. So let's start on this side. Oh, there we go. Now this one. Finger tight. Whee! Nothing. Oh, that one's loose. See, oh, that one's loose. What else? This one's loose. Holy crap. This is the worst one I've had so far. This one's loose. Loose.
Okay, so let's compare the different types of noises or ticks that we might hear on the top side of the engine. The first one that we're going to talk about is true lifter tick. This is the dreaded GM lifter tick that you've heard so much about. A lot of people describe it as the sound of like taking two screwdrivers and tapping them together. Now these ticks can be a little bit disorienting. It may be hard to pinpoint where it's coming from with just your ear. So this is where you want to use your mechanic stethoscope or maybe that hose trick that I just showed you. So let's listen to a video now of true lifter tick and train your ear to the sound of it and compare to what you have.
Okay, so it's idling down now. And give it a minute, just idle down a little more.
Another noise that's often confused with lifter tick on these engines is exhaust leaks. And exhaust leaks are super common on these LS engines because the exhaust manifold bolts break so easily. Here's a video of an exhaust leak so that you can train your ear again to what that sounds like and compare to what you're hearing on your vehicle. So notice how that exhaust leak actually sounded like exhaust once you started listening to it. And also notice that as we raised the RPM, it kind of got a little quieter as that exhaust was able to fly by that leaking spot there next to the head. One of the things that might happen is that as the car warms up, that noise from an exhaust leak might go away as the metal gets hot and expands and closes that gap that the exhaust has been sneaking out of. And a real common thing to see where you have an exhaust leak is that blackening, that carbon black that is sprayed out of that exhaust leak area as a dead giveaway of where that exhaust leak is at. Especially check around these manifolds, especially if you're missing some manifold bolts. Another ticking sound that often gets confused with lifter tick on these engines is coil arcing or spark jumping. So I'm going to show you a video now of that, and I want you to train your ear to the sound of that. It's a very snappy or crackly sound compared to that lifter tick that we heard earlier.
I was kind of curious as to what it could possibly be. So started looking, and I listened with my stethoscope, didn't really hear nothing. But it sounds to me like an arcing noise, you know, like a coil. But it really doesn't have much of a misfire. So I disconnected the coil on number one, and now it's actually misfiring. Connect it back up, and misfire is actually gone. Disconnect it, it's got a misfire. come to find out, plug wire is actually off the coil.
Do me a favor right now, hit that subscribe button. It's not going to sign you up for a bunch of junk mail or anything like that. What it does is it helps YouTube know that you guys are appreciating this content, and it helps me to reach a greater audience. I appreciate it. Okay, so now I'm going to show you all three videos back to back so that you can hear the difference between true lifter tick, which is the first sound you'll hear, exhaust leaks, the second video, or coil arcing or spark jumping, which is the third video. So here, listen to these three, train your ear, and distinguish the differences.
Okay, so tight.
But it sounds to me like an arcing noise, you know, like a coil. But it really doesn't have much of a misfire.
Okay, so now you've heard what true lifter tick sounds like. And if you still think that that's what you've got going on, we're going to have to dig a little deeper. For our diagnosis, the next step is to remove the valve covers. First step in removing the valve covers is to remove this PCV hose. Very easily done, just pinch the connectors and pull it off. Then you want to remove your oil cap. And now you can put your fingers underneath the edges of this black plastic cover and pull it out and then wiggle it out of the way. Once you've got that black plastic cover out of the way, you'll be able to see your coil packs. Now, the stock coil packs are black. I chose this picture of the red ones just because it's so much easier on here to see the bolts that hold it down. First step in removing the coil packs is to unplug the coils here at the top. And then, of course, remove the 10mm bolts that hold them down. And then you can leave them attached to the plug wires and just let them hang down below the valve covers, sort of out of the way. Now we move on to remove that valve cover. The valve cover is held in place by 10mm bolts all around the perimeter, shown here with these little black arrows. If you got the older style truck, it'll be held on with 4 8mm bolts down the center of the valve cover. All those bolts are the same except for this one on the later model trucks, which is just a hair longer, and it's longer because it's used to also hold down the fuel rail. The only other fastener that you got to worry about before you can remove the valve cover here is there's a torque screw that's holding the dipstick tube, the oil dipstick tube, to the valve cover here. So just remove that screw and then push the tube out of the way so you can pull the valve cover off. So once you are sure that you got all the bolts removed that are holding that valve cover down, you want to pull up on it or pry up on it. It may take a little bit of elbow grease because these things usually are stuck down pretty good. You may just even try using a rubber hammer to tap on it to see if you can break that seal. Okay, so now that you've got your valve covers off, it's time to do a visual inspection of the valve train. You want to look at the springs and the rockers and the push rods and look for obvious problems. Pay especially close attention to cylinders 1, 4, 6, and 7. Remember, those are the DOD AFM cylinders. If there's going to be a problem on one of those cylinders, usually, not always, but usually it's going to be on the intake valve or intake rocker. Let's talk about a few things you want to look for during the visual inspection part of your diagnosis. To check your rocker arms, you're going to want to wiggle them side to side, and you're going to want to try to put your finger under the tip right above the spring and lift up on it or try to pry it up off of the spring. If you can wiggle it side to side, chances are that's showing you that there's some looseness in those bearings. So check them for problems like the one that's shown here. If you can put your finger underneath there or even a small screwdriver and lift that rocker up off of the spring, you're basically pushing the push rod down inside the lifter, and that's showing that that lifter may be collapsed. Also with the springs, you want to look along the sides of them for any cracks or breaks. With the push rods, they should go down through the head, through the hole that's in the head, right in the center of that hole, like this one here. If you see one of them's got the push rod up against the side of that hole in the head, chances are there's a bent push rod in that slot, and you need to check that one. This is mainly an issue on the later model trucks, 2014 to 18. And if it does have a bent push rod, usually when you look at that push rod, it's going to be really obvious. But if you're questioning one, you can always roll it on a flat surface and check if it's got a minor bend in it. When the push rods are bent, oftentimes they will rub up against the side of the head or the side of the lifter bore and cause marks on the push rod like this. And since that push rod will rub up against the side of the lifter, it's important that you look down inside that lifter bore and check out the top of that lifter if you find a bent push rod there. Make sure that the lifter's still in good shape. And you can compare that top of the lifter in that bore that had the bent push rod to another bore where it doesn't have any problems. Just make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. You're looking at the top of an AFM lifter and another top of an AFM DOD lifter, not comparing a AFM DOD lifter to a non-AFM lifter like the one on the bottom here. You can see the top view for the AFM lifter at the top of this page and the top view for the normal cylinder on the bottom of the page. And so obviously, if you're looking down in there and you see those two things, you're going to compare them and say, hey, there's a problem here, when really there isn't. Just make sure you're comparing apples to apples. And if you do remove a rocker arm in order to check the push rods or whatever, make sure that when you put that one back in place that you torque the bolt down to 22 foot-pounds. Okay, so we've done a visual inspection, and now it's time for a little safety message, okay? This is where you want to be really safe, because you're going to be putting your hands into an area and cranking the engine over. There's going to be a lot of moving parts, and you don't want to come away missing any of your digits. So please be careful as you go through this next step, but it's a really necessary one. In order to watch the valve train move while it's cranking, you're going to have to turn the engine over. There's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can actually start the truck with 4 of the coils on one bank unplugged, and it'll run. I don't suggest you do it that way though. I'd much prefer that you use some sort of a jumper in the fuse box to jump the starter and get it to turn over on command. Much safer this way. And my preferred method of doing it that way is not to figure out some kind of a jumper wire and hope that you've got the right connections underneath that relay. My favorite way to do that is to use a relay switch. This is what the relay switches look like. They just plug into the place of the relay and allow you to toggle on whatever system is controlled by that relay. I like this method best because you can control when the engine cranks, for how long the engine cranks, and you can stop it immediately if something goes wrong. And typically you can reach the fuse box while you're leaning over the engine. There's also less of a risk of the jumper wire that you create causing a problem, either jumping the wrong circuit and frying something, or arcing inside the fuse box and causing some melting of the pins or anything like that. And to save you guys some time, I've already done the work for you. And here's where you can find the starter relay on the different year model trucks. So here's where the starter relay is located in the 99 to 2007 trucks. And here's where it's located in the 2007 to 2013. And finally, here's where the starter relay is located in your 2014 to 2019 truck. So for the cranking part of our diagnosis, you're going to want to make sure that the battery's topped off, got a good charge, because you're going to be turning over this engine for a little while without it starting. Oh, while I'm thinking about it, in case you're wondering, this is not like one of the older engines, like an old Chevy 350 or something. You got the valve cover off of it and you go to cranking it over and oil starts squirting out of the push rods and things like that. This one won't actually do that. So you're safe to go ahead and crank it over with those valve covers removed, and it won't make a big mess on you. That being said, now if you try to start that engine and let it run while those valve covers are off, then eventually that oil will get up there and start slinging around a little bit. But as long as you're cranking over by jumping the starter, it's not going to make a mess on you. And I'm going to jump start the truck. Watch this. We're looking to make sure that everything's moving correctly and doesn't feel funky. Okay, so now crank over the engine and watch the rockers through their movement. If one doesn't move at all, it's just stationary and all the others are just moving away doing their thing, then that one has probably got a stuck or a collapsed lifter in it or a broken push rod, so check that. If one moves for a few cranks like this and then it stops and all the others keep moving, well, that one probably has a rotated lifter in it, and when that lifter rotated in its bore, it probably tore up the camshaft as well. So you gotta check that. Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky, okay guys? This is where you need to be really careful and really safe. While the rockers are moving and you're cranking that engine, you want to put your hand on top of the rocker, right on top of the bearings, okay? Keep your hand safe from being pinched by these things or the springs. So put it right on top, and doing this, you'll be able to feel the bearings inside of that rocker. You'll be able to feel the movement of the roller tip on that lifter on the cam lobe. And it'll tell you if it's crunchy or you feel any jumpiness to it. Doom, 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 doom. That'll tell you that there's a problem with that lifter and that cam lobe. Okay, so we've just diagnosed your engine. At least now you know what the problem is, and you can determine whether or not it makes sense to fix it, either yourself or to take it to someone else to fix it for you. So I started this video off by saying, calm down, it may not be that bad. And the reason I said that is because some of these lifter or engine ticking sounds that we might find can be relatively minor as far as the cost is concerned, repairs. Maybe you've been lucky and you found through the diagnosis process that I just taught you that all you had was a broken spring, or maybe the bearings on a rocker were bad, or maybe a bent push rod with no other internal injuries. But if you found that by putting your hand on top of the rocker you felt that there was that crunchiness or it was jumping around a little bit, that typically means that there's a problem with the lifter and likely the camshaft as well. And that's a full teardown. And if you're going to have to do that, I'm sorry, but that's going to be expensive. It's going to be probably $5,000 or more to have somebody do that. And you might as well delete the AFM DOD system while you're at it so that this problem doesn't come back in the future. Guys, if you learned something here today that saved you a few $1,000s in unnecessary repairs and you want to send me a little thanks, you can send me a couple of bucks to Venmo. I'll share a coffee with you. Or if you had bad news, I'll share a shot of whiskey with you too. I really hope you guys found this to be highly useful information. If there's something that I missed or got wrong, please leave a comment down below and help the community out. Thank you for your time today. Check out these other videos for more diagnostic tips. Appreciate you tuning in, and God bless.